In the heart of a bustling city lived a man named Thomas. Growing up, Thomas always cared what other people thought. When he became an adult, he defined himself by the things he had. He was a man who built his entire identity around the tangible, external aspects of his life. When people asked him about himself, he would say simply, "My name's Thomas, I'm married, I'm a great accountant, and I have amazing hair." This was his world, his identity, the mirror in which he saw his reflection. Everything he was, everything he would become, were built around these external attachments. One fateful day, his world began to crumble. Coming home from work, his wife seemed uneased, as she said she needed to talk to him. Worried that she might be sick, or that someone had died, he quickly sat down. Instead, she confessed that she wasn't happy in the marriage, and she was having an affair. In an instant, his reality shattered. The revelation led to a heated argument. "How could you do this to me?" he cried out, his voice echoing through the house. Eventually, once all the words that could be said were said, he left, devastated and desolate. Thomas sought refuge in a hotel, a temporary sanctuary from these new ruins. He no longer felt whole or complete. Days passed, and he went to work and came back to the hotel. Each day, his hair got thinner, though he didn't notice. Then one morning, he woke up to another shock. His pillow was littered with strands of hair, and his reflection in the mirror was of a bald man. "What's happening to me?" he whispered, his hand instinctively reaching up, touching the smooth, bare skin where his pride once resided. Fear and confusion gripped him, but he was already running late and needed to get to work. He left the hotel, his hands constantly returning to the unfamiliar baldness of his head. But when he got to work, before he could even get to his desk, his boss was calling him to his office. His boss shot him down, and he could see where this was going. His services no longer needed. "I'm sorry, Thomas. We have to let you go," his boss said. The world seemed to spin around him, his identity slipping through his fingers like sand. He returned to the hotel. He was hoping to find solace there, or at least sleep, so he could start planning what to do next. But when he came into his room, he found it had been burglarized, all his belongings gone. As he stepped outside, he noticed something strange about his arm. It looked like a jigsaw puzzle, smooth and segmented. He stared at it, trying to figure out what was happening. When he touched his arm, a piece fell off, revealing not the expected sight of flesh and bone, but an abyss of darkness. "What is happening to me?" he murmured worriedly. Panic surged through him as more pieces began to detach, his body falling apart like he was falling apart. Everything he knew, everything he thought about himself, was gone, and now his body was going as well. People on the streets recoiled in horror at the sight of him. "Monster!" someone yelled. Fearful and alone, Thomas ran. He found solace in a secluded wooded area by a tranquil lake. He sat down, his body continuing to shed pieces, leaving behind voids of nothingness. In this moment of despair, Thomas looked into the lake, his fragmented reflection staring back at him. He felt his identity, his very existence, slipping away. But in the face of this inexplicable fate, as he realized that he still existed, even now, even with everything that he once valued, even with his very body disappearing, he still was. He began to laugh. For so long, he thought so many things were him, but none of them were. In that moment, he accepted his fate. He accepted that for all of his life, he had never been his true self. Whether he was pleasing people or confusing himself with everything he did, he wasn't that. He was something else, and he had always been something else. He let go. "It's okay," he whispered to his reflection, letting go of the fear, the confusion, the pain, and the identity he had so tightly clung to. Piece after piece fell off of him until the last piece fell. Just as Thomas was certain that this was the end, Thomas exploded into a radiant being of light. The woods were illuminated by his brilliance. The void disappeared. And then, as quickly as it happened, the light receded. Thomas found himself whole again, sitting by the lake as if nothing had happened. His body was together. He was, for the first time, just Thomas, and there was a relief and a calm and a joy. He looked at his reflection in the water, but he no longer saw the accountant, the husband, the man with a full head of hair. He didn't see a man who lost these things either. He saw himself. not defined by external attributes, but by his essence. "I am," he said, his voice echoing across the lake. He realized that he was not the sum of his possessions or his relationships, but something more profound, more intrinsic, something more altogether. Thomas stood up, a sense of peace washing over him. He was ready to face the world again, not as the man he thought he was, but as the man he truly was. His journey of self-discovery had led him to understand that his identity was not tied to the external world, but was something that resided deep within him. He took a deep breath, looked back at the woods that he had run into. "It's all going to be all right," he said, stepping back into the world, ready to create a new life for himself.